The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are continuing with our look at the player cards in the Scarlet Keys Investigator expansion. This is part 2 of our look at the Seeker cards. In this episode, we are going to discuss Dissection Tools, Grim Memoir, Map the Area, and Lab Coat. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we get started, a quick reminder of how we rate cards here on The Whisper in Darkness. The best of the best get an Elder Sign, while the worst of the worst get an Auto Fail, and the cards in between get a +1, 0, or Elder Thing respectively. Cards that you build around or cards that are good in one particular deck get a Bless token, while cards that we believe are destined to end up on the list of taboos or are simply bad for the big game get a Curse token. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these player card reviews. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Cole Monroe Tridi for the amazing art that graces the channel, Nicole Fiscus for the Whisper in Darkness logo, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for the intro as well as the overlays. Thank you very much. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. Welcome back, Arkham Horror fans, to our review of the player cards in the Scarlet Keys Investigator expansion. This is part 2 of our look at the Seeker cards. We are going to kick things off with Dissection Tools. It is a 2-cost asset with an agility skill icon, item tool, and science trait. As a response, after an enemy at your location is defeated, place 1 resource from the token pool on this card as evidence. While Dissection Tools has 1 or more evidence, you get +1 agility. 2 or more evidence, you get +1 combat. And 3 or more evidence, you get +1 sanity. And it takes up a hand slot. Now, this is the agility / combat version of Hawkeye Folding Camera that I believe was released during the Circle Undone cycle, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and Hawkeye Folding Camera has always been pretty popular in decks. There are a wide variety of decks that play Hawkeye Folding Camera, and the card has seen something of a resurgence of late with the release of Daryl Simmons in the box, who can actually turn the evidence that you place on Hawkeye Folding Camera into skill bonuses during tests. Dissection Tools has not seen, at least so far, not nearly as much love as the Hawkeye Folding Camera, likely because for the most part Seekers have pretty bad agility in combat, so adding 1 to 2, they tend to have below average agility in combat, so adding 1 to those skills isn't quite as useful. Now, it is a tool which Kaimani Jones can use, but what do you think about this one?
So one thing that's worth noting, and probably why as you said, this card hasn't seen a lot of action, is that adding to combat and agility, it's kind of rare that that's like a particularly good thing. Because often enough, you're using your combat or your agility. You don't really use them a lot together in Seekers. Now, if you're a rogue, there are a few cards that can use agility and combat together, like Cheap Shot, for example, where it's actually kind of a good thing that you can, double stack them up. So what this thing is, I just look at this and I don't see it as a Seeker card. I see it more like a rogue card, to be honest. Yeah, because it's rogues who kind of want these stat boosts. Does that, if you get what I'm saying? So I like how this thing can increase combat with a hand slot. I like how it can increase agility with a hand slot. So individually, those 2 bonuses are actually pretty good because especially agility, there aren't a whole lot of ways to boost that cheaply. And with a hand slot, I like this. So I'm thinking someone like Trish, maybe, just for the agility. Although Trish might have trouble defeating enemies. Kamani, of course. Although Kamani, it's kind of weird because Kamani's ability is not so much about defeating enemies. Let's see. So I think this card is not for your basic seeker. I think it's not for every seeker, for sure. I think it's more for some off-class seekers who have a free hand and are doing combat. I think it's the way to go. So someone like maybe a Trish, maybe Finn Edwards could use something like this. Because it's also worth noting, in order to get the evidence down, enemies have to be defeated. Now that could be a good thing because if you're the primary monster slayer, you could be defeating 2 or 3 enemies in a turn, and you could load this thing up very quickly. Unlike the Hawkeye folding camera, where it takes a little while to fit to empty 3 locations and be there for them. That takes a bit of effort. But yeah, this can get loaded up pretty quickly. So the real question is who, like, what deck has this as its home? Because I'm already thinking things like maybe Roland, who's defeating enemies, maybe Joe Diamond. That seems to be the two I've got on the brain lately. So yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is like who uses this, and it's not straightforward.
Yeah, this one is it's interesting to compare this to Hawkeye folding camera because you'd sort of expect it to be like, well, Hawkeye folding camera is willpower and intellect. This one's agility combat. They're basically mirrors of each other, but I feel like this one is not going to see as much play simply because I don't think there are many seekers who want this type of effect. Like you said, usually you're picking either agility or combat. You're not tending to play both. And so that's one sort of strike against this. Whereas, with Hawkeye folding camera, willpower and intellect are both pretty good. You're going to be using willpower for treacheries. You need intellect to get clues. Both are valuable. And here, I think you're either you want one or the other. And the other interesting thing I found about this is looking through the investigators, the sort of seekers and off-class seekers who might want this tend to want the combat more than the agility, I think. Like Roland would prefer to have the combat. Yeah. Joe would prefer to have the combat. Vincent Lee has 3 combat, so you'd sort of think, well, if you want to give him a little bit of a combat boost, he wants the combat, but the combat is buried beneath the agility, so you have to defeat more enemies to get that combat boost, which is going to be a little bit slow, I think, at times, which is a little awkward. Like you said, I think if you're approaching this from the rogue angle, then you do want sort of agility combat in that order, and then if you can get the sanity, all the better, due to their low willpower as it is. But it's sort of, I think, an awkward card at times. It's not as clear cut as Hawkeye folding camera. And plus, I think from a solo player's perspective, I think this one is slower than Hawkeye folding camera, where I think in multiplayer, Hawkeye folding camera might be slower than this, because in multiplayer, clearing a bunch of locations with a ton of clues is going to take time. That's not necessarily an issue in solo, where drawing enemies is a bigger problem in solo because you've got to wait for them to show up. And so this one is going to take, I think, more time to really get up online if you're playing in lower player counts, where Hawkeye folding camera works slightly better. So there are pros and cons to this one, and certainly I took a quick peek over at Arkham DB, and there are many Hawkeye folding camera builds now with Daryl, and this one I believe had 2 decks. So people haven't, because
it's really specific, I think this card is.
Players haven't really gravitated toward this one yet, and I don't know if it, if you are interested in playing this, or if you are interested in this type of effect, we also receive the very, very good combat training in Edge of the Earth, which provides both of these skill bonuses and then some on top of that. It does cost XP, but you also don't have to kill anything to get it set up, and it provides health and sanity to boot. So there is an option for those investigators who are looking for these types of bonuses. How would you rate this one?
I think I'd give it a 0 because on the face, it is, if you look at it as a card that says get +1 agility or get +1 combat, it's still okay because those two tend to be kind of expensive and they tend to require the ally slot for the most part. So the fact that you have an option of having a hand slot provide a boost to either one, that's before you get to the fact that it boosts both. I think it's still like worth a 0 at that point.
Yeah, I have a hard time giving this one less than a 0 simply because its counterpart is ubiquitous in a lot of different decks. And you know, it may just be the fact that we don't really have an investigator yet who can really excel at this, but we do have quite a few rogues who would certainly like this type of boost. And I think the combat side is a little trickier because Seekers tend to lean into their agility more than their combat. And so, yeah, I'll rate it a 0 as well. I think it's, the bonuses are good. It's just, I'm not too sure whether, who is going to be playing this quite yet. The next card we're going to take a look at is Grim Memoir. It's a 3-cost asset with an intellect skill icon, item, and tome trait. Uses 4 secrets as an action. Spend 1 secret, investigate. You get +2 intellect for this investigation. If you succeed by 2 or more, you may draw 1 card and it takes up a hand slot. Thoughts on Grim Memoir?
My initial thought is that it's kind of slow, but you get to make 4 investigate tests at +2. So it's kind of like you're spending 3 resources in an action. You put this into play. It's kind of like you get 4 almost perceptions, which I think is isn't too bad. So in that case, I kind of want to compare it to Fingerprint Kit. Fingerprint Kit, you spend 4 resources, you put it into play, and it's kind of like you end up drawing 3 deductions. And I love that card. I can't say this card is that bad. I think if you're doing it for the draw, I say take Captivating Discovery instead, or even like Preposterous Sketches. Just get the draw. Spend less, don't spend a slot, draw the cards. But if you're actually leaning on this for the intellect boost, I don't think this is that bad. I think the main downside of this is that it takes up the same slot as Magnifying Glass. Yeah, so I'd say it's not bad.
Yeah, when I see tomes like this, I inevitably go to Daisy because she does get the extra action with tomes, and I don't tend to play a lot of tomes in other Seekers or off-class Seekers simply because they are more action intensive than they are in Daisy. So Daisy gets the 4th investigate here at 7, I believe. Which is, if you're not succeeding on that, then there's something pretty seriously wrong. And if you succeed by 2 or more, you're getting a card on top of that, which is, for a level 0 card, it's pretty good.
I don't know if Daisy's the type to use it because Daisy doesn't need the +2. I'm thinking investigators who really want the +2 are the ones who are really good for this. So rogues. Or Roland Banks, maybe. Ones who have 3 or 4 intellect.
Yeah, but I think you raise a good point when you compare it to Magnifying Glass.
Yeah, and then Magnifying Glass.
That's fast, right? So you're cheaper and faster. You're not getting the draw or as much boost, but Magnifying Glass is also unlimited, which this is not. So
yeah.
It doesn't exhaust, which is one of the nice things. So if you happen to have to do, say, if you just do 4 investigates in one turn, you're potentially drawing 4 cards and getting a
Yeah,
plus
that's
2 on
true.
each of those tests. So
That's true. But if you're, I guess what I'm getting at is if you're after the cards, you've already got like Preposterous Sketches and Captivating Discovery in this deck to like draw cards. Okay. If you need if you need 2 intellect, this is pretty good. If you don't need the 2 intellect, Magnifying Glass will do you right. So I feel like this thing it's not terrible, but it's not very good either.
how would you rate this one?
Probably Elder Thing. Yeah, probably Elder Thing. It's pretty niche. I like the numbers feel right for like I think it might be a little costly, but the fact that it provides +2 intellect, like it means I think it has a place somewhere. I don't think that's very frequent though.
I think I'm going to go with 0. I don't
Yeah, it does just work, so yeah,
think I can go as low as another thing.
Mhm.
I think if you're building a level 0 deck, if you've got maybe a more limited card pool,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yep.
could do a
You
lot
can do a lot worse than
worse
this.
than
Yeah.
something that gives you a bonus
Mhm.
to your intellect. And we haven't really talked about the whole succeed by 2 aspect of it, and that may lend itself to some of the rogues that we've seen,
True.
specifically Trish being one of them. Not very familiar with Trish's deck building though, so I don't know whether this would find a home in that. The other one would be Monterey Jack, but Monterey he only gets 5 level 0 seeker slots, which makes a lot of these cards questionable in him. Like, just going back to dissection tools, there's another card that he might be interested in, but given his limited number of seeker cards, the seeker card pool is very, very strong. So I don't know whether this beats out a lot of the other cards that would be available to somebody
You
with limited access to the seeker card pool. But
yeah.
it's not
You have
bad. I mean,
you have brought up a use in my mind about this. I think in investigators like Trish and maybe Jenny. Well, Jenny less so, but I think Trish in particular, I think this is stronger than level 0 lockpicks. As good as lockpicks is, the problem with level 0 lockpicks is that they break, like
yeah.
very easily, and then you lose them forever. So, like, if you have this in those card slots and then you upgrade them to level 1 lockpicks, I think that's a pretty good idea.
The next card we're going to look at is Map the Area. It's a 1-cost event with a willpower and agility skill icon, insight, and tactic trait. Investigate. Add your willpower or agility to your skill value for this investigation. If you succeed, instead of discovering clues at this location, attach Map the Area to it. Limit 1 per location. Reduce the difficulty of all skill tests at attached location by 1. Now, we took a look at Breach the Door back during our Guardian reviews, and this one seems similar to that, with
True.
the proviso that this one doesn't necessarily deal with the shroud value of the location, although that is one of the benefits. This one just makes all skill tests good at that location. Now, from a solo perspective, I'm not a huge fan of this one, simply because in solo you're usually moving quickly from location to location to location. So spending the time to drop this on a location and not get clues that you're going to probably leave very quickly doesn't make a lot of sense to me. What do you think about this one in a multiplayer environment?
No, it's still pretty bad. I would play deduction over this like 10 times out of 10. Like, I would wish this was something that actually pushed the game forward. Because here it is, you're spending a resource, a card, and an action, and you haven't pushed the game forward at all. All you're doing is maybe turning some failures into successes. So let's think about that. Okay, so reduces the difficulty of all tests by 1. Seems cool. But then again, only a percentage of those tests where the difficulty is reduced will this matter. Okay, because a good proportion of them, they were going to succeed anyway, even with the regular difficulty. This +1, it's not going to always help. So the effect isn't always going to be meaningful. It doesn't really do anything with the first action. So You know what I wish this was? I wish it was kind of like a skeleton key, but for seekers, where you could reuse it. Because then I could see something there where it's like, okay, you go to the location, you use your map to like map the area, you attach your map to the location, and then maybe as a free action you scoop it back up, and then you go to another location, you drop it down. So that way in only one card slot, you're mapping the areas as you need them. But the fact that it's an event is kind of like the worst part about it, in my opinion. Like I don't see myself ever running it. The
Yeah,
art looks
unfortunately, cards that have the instead of discovering clues clause
yeah,
tend
because
to
you don't push the game forward at all.
not be
Yeah.
great
Mhm.
because if you're investigating, you really want the clues, and the fact
Mhm.
that this, like you said, doesn't really do a whole lot. I mean, it's entirely possible that your seeker puts this on a location and then nobody takes another skill test at that
Yep.
location and you move on and nothing really happens. I mean, I could
Or
maybe see this in Rex Murphy simply because it
yes,
lets him succeed by 2 because you're going to add, I think, what's
yes,
his agility? Is his willpower 3 as well?
yeah. His willpower's 3.
So he'd
Yeah.
be at 7, I believe. So,
Hmm.
which improves the odds of him succeeding by 2 and getting a clue anyway. But yeah, from a solo player's perspective, this one really doesn't appeal to me. And
It's like heroic rescue. It looks good in multiplayer, but you still never manage to play it. Yeah. Yeah, this is, and I think one sign that the effect is really bad is the fact that it lets you choose a stat to add to your intellect, because this effect's kind of bad, so we gotta somehow make it even gentler somehow, the test itself. Why does this even need to be a test? What if you could just attach it? You spend a resource, you've already spent an action. That's already enough, and you just attach it to a location.
so, how would you rate this one?
Tentacle. I would never play this.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give it a tentacle as well. It's
Yeah.
I'm gonna let my solo bias show through here and
Hmm.
hit this one with a tentacle. As yeah, it's a card I won't play, and I would certainly play. I know we received a lot of comments in the Guardian review about Breach the Door, and I Breach the Door is much better than this one,
I agree. Yeah, I agree
and
because
provides
it
a
enables
much
a lot.
potentially a much greater
Yeah,
bonus for
yeah.
something that you actively want to be doing, which is discovering clues. Just sort of a
Mhm.
blanket +1 or reduce the difficulty by 1,
Oh, I know what it
maybe.
does. It lets you attack rats at difficulty 0. It
So
does.
you get to kill rats better,
You
which
do get to kill
is,
rats better.
I guess,
Yep.
something.
It means Wendy can kill rats pretty effectively, but Wendy can't play this card. It's an event where the effect is just too limited and too small. This is not the first time I've seen an event like this. Like Heroic Rescue, for example, or Dodge manages to not make to stay in the binder for some reason. It's kind of like that, or it's like it's just the effect is too small to be a card slot.
The final card we're going to look at in this review is Lab Coat. It's a 2-cost asset that costs 1 experience point. It has a willpower skill icon, the item, clothing, and science trait. Man, oh man, where is Kate Winthrop when you need her? Lots of cards with the science trait in this box. As a response, when you would fail a skill test on a seeker card by 1 or less exhaust lab coat, you succeed by 0 instead. It has 1 health, 1 sanity, and takes up a body slot. Thoughts on lab coat?
It seems pretty decent. The fact that it has soak is makes it actually pretty good. Man, it's kind of interesting that we were talking about this right after we talked about map the area, because this is kind of like almost kind of maybe like an asset version of map the area, where it virtually reduces difficulties by 1. Although on seeker cards, yeah, this is a very much a survivory effect. I wish Survivor had this card, because it's such a survivor effect.
Well,
It's
don't
like,
they
because
have
it's,
Granny Orn, who basically, or the
yeah, but
upgraded
she's
version?
expensive compared
Yeah.
to this. She's expensive. This is cheap and it takes up a body slot. This is very much a Granny Orn effect, but this is like does a better job of doing what Map the Area wants to do, and that is turn failures by one into successes.
So do you think it matters that this is failing a skill test on a seeker card? Now, this is not sort of just a generic, you fail a skill test by one or less, you're going to pass. It has to be on a seeker card. So you have to be doing something with either a seeker asset or a seeker event of some kind in order to get the benefit.
Yeah, and there are quite a few of them. Fingerprint kit comes to mind immediately. But I think up above, we were just talking about, where did it go? Grim Memoir, for example. That's another one. Seekers don't have like weapons per se, but any like events that deal with enemies. So what it mainly doesn't include are basic investigates and treacheries. That's the main thing. And I'm kind of glad, because this is like really a survivor effect. And if it could work on any test, I'd be like, curse token, flip the table, you know? So I think this is pretty good. It gives some soak, and it kind of does, like I said, what Map the Area already does. Now, that being said, you're going to need cards in your deck that are going to be Seeker and have skill tests on them. If they're all Intellect and you already have a zillion Intellect, then this card probably won't do much for you, because you're probably already going to be blowing through skill tests already, and failing by one or less is probably not going to happen very often. But if you have like a variety of things, then I think this is pretty good. If you're making like agility tests and combat tests on Seeker cards, I don't play enough Seekers to know what they all are, but then this is pretty good.
Yeah, there's not a great deal of competition for the body slot in any class, and so throwing Seekers a bone and giving them something if they want to put it in their body slots. I mean, it does have soak, which is awfully nice. Mm-hmm. I do agree, if you're just stacking intellect to the sky, this is not going to be interesting to you. But if you are playing a Seeker or off-class Seeker who isn't necessarily going all in on intellect, this is going to chip in with a success now and again. It'd be interesting to track this one and see, maybe if you do include this in your deck, just pay attention to how many times it actually triggers, and if you find that it's not happening, then probably either replace it with something else. It's kind of hard that it is 1 XP, so you're sort of committing to this idea that maybe before you buy this, just see, like, are you failing a lot of tests by 1 on Seeker cards? If so, there's a solution. If that's not happening, then I think you can safely ignore this one. But
yeah, you can say a similar thing about Map the Area. It's like, how many failures is Map the Area going to turn into successes? It's a similar thing. At least this follows you around for the whole game, though.
How would you rate this one?
Probably still an Elder thing, because it is pretty narrow. If Seeker had a lot of things that used like willpower and things that used agility and maybe some things that use combat, if it had more cards that used a variety of tests, then I think it would get better. But because your typical Seeker like stacks intellect to the sky, then if all you're doing is stacking intellect to the sky, then magnifying glass is better than this.
Yeah, I've played Granny Orn in Survivor and found that she was very useful. Yeah. This is the upgraded version, not the basic version. But the upgraded version of her, I found that I could trigger it fairly consistently. The big difference there is that survivors aren't stacking intellect. And so a lot of their skills are a lot sort of, you're not ending up with 5s and 6s, generally speaking. There are exceptions, of course, but most of your skills are 3s and 4s, which that have the potential to trigger this type of effect a lot more often. How would I rate this one? It is fairly narrow because it only applies to Seeker cards. So yeah, I think Elder's thing is about right for it. If you look at your deck and you say, well, look at all of these Seeker events and assets I have that I'm going to be using, then maybe pick this up along the way. The problem is with Seekers, there are just so many really powerful upgrades for Seekers that this one just sort of pales in comparison. Like, isn't hiking boots one?
Oh, that's right. And that's something that's like gonna always work for you. Yeah. That's always gonna do work. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, I hate to say it, but this might even slip down to tentacle territory just based on the Seeker card pool as it is. Like, but, it does a thing. And
yeah, it does a thing. Like, you've got me thinking, if you think of it as a narrow version of +1 intellect, then I guess it's not too bad. It's not like tentacle territory. Like, if you're playing a 4 intellect Seeker and you have like magnifying glasses but no Dr. Milan or anything like that, I could see this. I can see this being above a tentacle in that case.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it gets down that far, but I think this one might get overshadowed by a lot of the other XP cards in the Seeker card pool, and certainly even in, if you're playing the clue dropping deck, that this box is sort of suggesting that you play, you're going to be spending 2 XP on press pass and simply bypassing.
Or
like this
quick study. Like, I would play quick study over this, like, for sure.
That's going to do it for this review. Let us know in the comments down below what you think. Any final thoughts on the remainder of the Seeker level 0 Seeker cards?
Seemed okay. There was an absolute stinker in Map the Area, but you know what? Each class seems to be having an absolute stinker so far. So it's a pattern. It's a cycle of stinker cards.
Yeah, the one thing that did impress me as I read through the Seeker card list is there didn't seem to be a whole lot of really egregious Seeker cards that were way over the top, which we haven't been able to say in past sets. So that was refreshing to look at it and to look at the Seeker card list and go, okay, well, there's actually some useful cards here that aren't necessarily blowing the gates off of off the game.
We do see that they're already like going for the lunches, even if they're not totally stolen yet. Like Bizarre Diagnosis attempts to do a Guardian thing, which is heal. You've got Analysis, which kind of does a Survivor thing, redraw tokens. And then you've got Lab Coat, which kind of does a Survivor thing as well. So they're definitely trying to steal. They're stealing the snacks,
That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.